Hello.
It's hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello there.
Welcome back to the Space School. Look, today we're going to find out what would have happened if Padme was a Sith Lord. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, everyone else part of my team. Want a chance to win a free lightsaber in the next giveaway? Watch it in the video, I'll tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins in the year 40 BBY, inside of the prominent Naboo house of Naboo. Much like the house of Palpatine, House Naboo was a prominent house on the planet of Naboo that was full of influential members. Inside of this particular house was a 4-year-old girl. She was spending time currently at the family's lake house estate on the far side of the planet. Her family was on vacation, and her name was Padme. Her parents noticed that she had attributes that might be of interest to the Jedi, but because of Padme's parents not wanting their daughter to become a Jedi, they moved away from their prominent residence inside of Theed to the countryside so that they could possibly avoid any encounters with the Jedi. Though a Jedi would be the least of their concerns. There was a 42-year-old prominent politician in Naboo by the name of Sheev Palpatine. While off the bat he didn't seem like a bad omen, he was in line to become the next Sith Lord in the galaxy. He was currently the student of Lord Plagueis, and his student was an assassin by the name of Maul. Darth Maul at this point was only 14 years old, but he was being trained rigorously. Palpatine had plans for Maul at some point, but he wasn't ever sure if Maul would be able to live up to his expectations. It's not that Maul wasn't strong enough. He was a young Zabrak, so he was physically skilled enough and strong enough with agility and strength that many other humanoids wouldn't be able to develop until later in life. But to Palpatine, it was more the fact that Plagueis knew about Maul. And because Plagueis knew about Maul, he had to be careful. Though, because he was in close contact with most of the prestigious houses on Naboo, Palpatine learned about this girl from the Naboo household. Palpatine would certainly be able to feel the presence of the Force within her, and it was a great presence, very powerful and had a lot of potential for growth. And the only reason Palpatine would ever consider taking in another apprentice is because of the fact that Plagueis wouldn't know about her. She could grow and develop into a true apprentice, while Maul took all of Plagueis' attention. The only issue with Padme is that, at this point, she was too young to be by herself, and her family was far too influential to just vanish without a trace. So instead of being traditional about it as a Sith, Palpatine decided that he would take advantage of Naboo's early age political power. Because House Naboo was powerful, there was a chance that they would very likely want Padme to become a queen of Naboo, and if they didn't already have an advisor lined up for her, then Palpatine could become said advisor, especially considering he already had a prominent voice in Naboo politics. Palpatine would make himself present towards the parents of Amidala to ensure that they would see him as a good choice for political advisor. Usually people that wanted to have a winner in the monarch race would choose a retiree, but because Palpatine was already extremely popular, and he liked his odds of being selected for the role. When the Amidalas returned from their lake house, Palpatine would approach the family and inform them that they had any members of the family that wanted to become royals, then he was willing to be an advisor. Palpatine also snuck in some extra bonus points to make his selling point to them all the more feasible. Within a couple of weeks, they would hire him for political advisement for Padme Amidala. They believed she'd be the most suitable to become Queen of Naboo at some point in her life. Palpatine's plan revolved around actually teaching Padme everything she needed to know to win, but even more than that, introducing her to the Force itself. Palpatine, using his incredible intellect, believed that she would be the perfect final installment to his plans. Though with some of his plans beginning against the Republic taking place within the next decade or so, he would need to get to work fast. At the start, Palpatine would do one lesson a week. At the end, for the last 5 or so minutes, Palpatine would show Padme what she could do with the Force. Really just amateur stuff, things that would be fun for her, like tossing a ball back and forth, using the Force to hold it in air and bring it down into her hands, and then throw it back to him. While yes, Palpatine was a Sith Lord, he had to gently approach this, because he couldn't risk scaring away the Amidalas. From time to time, he'd have to skip lessons so that he could continue to ruse with Plagueis or just simply do his work as a senator for Naboo. As Padme got a little older, the 5 minutes of Force training would turn into about 10. Padme saw Palpatine almost like an uncle of sorts. He was fun, kind, and very insightful. The amount of sessions would grow from 1 to 2 sessions a week. Throughout this time, Palpatine would begin to notice a very evident growth from Padme. Though his young student would express that her parents didn't like her using the Force, not that she told them they were practicing the Force, but more or less when she used it around the house to do something easier, her parents told her that the Force would bring the Jedi, and they would take her away to the Jedi Temple. Padme asked Sheev if he was a Jedi, to which he would explain that he was much more than any Jedi could ever dream of becoming. He explained it in simple terms, that he used the Force to better himself, not as a means to be exploited by a code. Palpatine made sure that he told Padme he was teaching her because it would help her enlighten herself as she grew older. The Force was a part of them as individuals, and without using that said Force, it would be a crime against themselves. Palpatine wanted to say everything as basic as he could, so that he could explain things as she got older. Ironically, the treatment of Padme was a 180 from what Palpatine was putting Maul through. It wasn't by Palpatine's choice, though. The next 10 years would fly by at a certain point. Between the political instruction, the Force teaching, and everything else that Palpatine had to do during the rest of his time, the years would pass incredibly quickly. During this time, Palpatine would teach Padme as much as he could, which would inevitably be helpful for her landing her as the youngest monarch in Naboo's history. This is exactly what Palpatine wanted. Though with Padme now on the surface of galactic politics, he needed to conceal her usage of the Force, because as brilliant as she was a politician, she was even more impressive with the Force. Now that she had the entire Theed Palace to herself, Palpatine would bestow her a gift, in the form of 2 lightsabers, already bled for her. At age 14, Padme would be first introduced to lightsabers. Certainly a late period for someone to be introduced to a lightsaber, but Palpatine didn't care. It would be the perfect place for her to start. With the entire Theed Palace themselves, Padme would be able to see more about what her mentor had been preaching regarding the Force. Padme was also filled in with the loop of what would be happening in the coming days. Palpatine was orchestrating a much larger plan that would involve Naboo. Padme had a hard time keeping up with Palpatine and what he was doing. She was very smart, but the ideas and concepts were very large, especially for a 14-year-old. All she knew is that everything would be taken care of by him on Coruscant, and the Trade Federation was going to be under strict orders not to harm her. Padme also didn't know about Plagueis. That was an extra detail she didn't need to know about. As for Maul, he also wasn't on her radar. Padme wasn't all too worried about this. She trusted Palpatine and she believed in his ideologies, considering she'd been taught him since she was 4. Palpatine would use the invasion of Naboo to levy power for himself in the Galactic Senate. When the droid armies marched on Naboo, Padme was calm and confident, the way a true leader should be during an invasion. She defined herself and her role as Queen as she planned to be captured by the Trade Federation. 2 Jedi would eventually go in and save the Queen, though by happenstance a chain of events would elongate and drag the Queen to Tatooine to see a pod race to which they would win the pod race for parts from their ship from a 9-year-old slave boy. Based on what the Jedi said, Padme could tell that Anakin was very powerful with the Force, not knowing who Master Yoda was other than that little bit of information Palpatine mentioned about him regarding him being a rival, but being that Yoda was less powerful with midichlorians than Anakin. When Padme and the group returned to Coruscant, Padme would express to Palpatine that she discovered a being on Tatooine. Anakin Skywalker was a slave from Tatooine. He and Padme had a little bit of bonding, but there was something more, something that Padme had an issue with. While on Tatooine, she was chased down by a Sith assassin. Palpatine told Padme that Maul was a means to an end, not really something to be lasting. Padme didn't really quite understand, but she felt rather betrayed that she wasn't told about Maul. It made her feel that Palpatine saw her as a means to an end as well. Truthfully, other than his election to become Chancellor, the invasion of Naboo, and all of her teachings, Palpatine was leaving a lot of information out. There was Plagueis, who was now dead, being that Palpatine already became Chancellor. Palpatine had Maul, but he also had Dooku, who was currently removing Kamino from the archives of the Jedi Temple, and Maul, Palpatine was going to get rid of soon. Palpatine was playing chess, and he only taught checkers to Padme. Padme would also head back to Naboo, to which she would take her throne back while the Jedi erased themselves from the picture. Qui-Gon died, and Maul was also apparently killed. Skywalker was able to destroy one of the droid control ships, which led to the end of the invasion of Naboo. Skywalker would be brought back to the Jedi Temple, and would be taught by Obi-Wan Kenobi. With everything in place to where Palpatine wanted it, he would inform Padme of everything she needed to know. With Maul apparently dead, he had to ensure that she was more inclined to trust him, so he would tell her about the clone army and exactly how that army would be erected in the next decade. She would also come to learn about a man who would be taking a powerful political position in the coming years. From House Sereno, Dooku would return to his homeworld to become the Count of the planet. This was a very important political role. It was very similar to the role that Padme currently filled on Naboo. Palpatine also told her to finish out her term as queen, and then work from there to become Senator of Naboo. While Sidious had his eyes set on the new apprentice in Anakin Skywalker, Padme had the same motive. She knew that Anakin already liked her. How much, she was unsure, but she was going to continue to affect him using their little bond that they established in their short time together. she'd begin putting dreams and visions into Anakin's mind of the two of them together with one another. Nothing too deep, but very on the surface dreams and visions to keep Anakin's little mind transfixed on her. For the next 10 years, Padme would train with Sidious and become a fine duelist. She would also spend a lot of time around Dooku on the down low, learning how to use a lightsaber very well. Both Dooku and Sidious were terrific duelists, so it was only a matter of time until Padme picked up on the skills that her master had. Padme would eventually move from the Queen of Naboo to the Senator of Naboo, the same position previously held by Sheev Palpatine. The two of them would work closely together, to which Padme would grow a group of close friends supporting everything she promoted. Palpatine's plan felt like it was holding great traction. He had two students both on either side of the political aisle. Though, as an attempt to draw Skywalker out into the open, Dooku would fake an assassination attempt on Amidala, which would encourage Palpatine to suggest, in a quotations, reluctant Padme to get protection. It would work brilliantly too. It would have Anakin and Obi-Wan jumping onto protecting Padme, in which the two of them would be separated. Though because this was intentional, Obi-Wan would follow a trail back to Mandalore because of Jango Fett's Mandalorian armor, instead of Kamino. On the other hand, Anakin and Padme would head back to Naboo. She knew that Anakin was head over heels for her, which she used to her advantage, subtly flirting with probably the most awkward individual in the entire galaxy. It wasn't really his fault. He was a Jedi and he had the excitement of someone who was far out of their comfort zone. Padme had the entire plan wrapped up in her sick, twisted mind. Being raised by a Sith Lord wouldn't be recommended for anyone who wanted to be nicer to other individuals. Padme was going to make Anakin fall in love with her, and then from there she was going to use him to kill Palpatine. She knew that, for a fact, Palpatine had already begun to dig his nails into Skywalker. It was a lot of basic interactions to build trust between the two of them. Most of what Palpatine did was place himself in a mentor role for someone like Anakin, similarly to how he did with Padme. Similar to what he did with Padme. It worked really well, and Palpatine made a point to not tell Padme about this plan, though Padme was secretly 3 steps ahead of her master, because she, unlike Palpatine, could become a romantic partner to Anakin. She already knew that Anakin used to have an infatuation for her, and as long as the Jedi didn't drive that out of him, then he was all hers. Padme would be instructed to return to Naboo to go to her family estate on the countryside. Obi-Wan would instruct Anakin to stay by her side throughout the entire duration of this mission. He was to go nowhere without specific instruction from the Jedi Council or from himself. Anakin surely understood his orders, but the game was already Padme's to win. Throughout the trip to Naboo, the slightest flirting would prove to Padme that Anakin was still interested. So with that knowledge already present for Padme, she would continue to present herself to Anakin in ways of which he could respond. All of Padme's plans were working. She didn't come off as too strong. She figured the chase would make Anakin more infatuated with her, and she was right to believe so. Everything was working until Skywalker had a nightmare about his mother's death, at which point would have Padme agreeing to go with him to Tatooine, the same dust bowl of a world she'd been to 10 years before. They'd be taken from Mos Espa to the Lars homestead, where Anakin would learn it was the Tuscans who took his mother. Anakin would leave the homestead and make way for the Tuscans who stole his mother away from him. Padme would wait behind, meditating on the dark side, all in an attempt to get further inside of Skywalker's mind. One night while Anakin was away, she felt his rage build, and then, in a very non-Jedi way, he slaughtered every single member of the Tuscan village. She could feel his power, and he could feel his own power. Anakin in this moment realized how powerful he could become, and it scared him in actuality. When Anakin returned, he was visibly shaken. Padme would be what Anakin needed her to be. She filled the role and played the game, to which Anakin fell for it, becoming more vulnerable than he'd been since becoming a Jedi. For Anakin, it was a 180 way of life. Ever since he started spending time with Padme, he felt like he could be a real person, just like the little kid from Tatooine used to be. Anakin and Padme were extremely open with each other, creating a sacred space of intimacy between the two of them. Because Obi-Wan wasn't on Geonosis, and instead on Mandalore, partially catching up with Satine and partially searching for the Mandalorian bounty hunter, Anakin and Padme were able to freely return to Naboo and continue their romantic endeavor. Without the beginning of the Clone Wars, the two of them would relish in their time alone, because, well, they were essentially truly alone, both young, vibrant individuals. While Anakin was falling in love, Padme was simply exploiting the Chosen One, making him believe there was really a profound sense of love between the two of them. It was really manipulative, but it functioned better than she could have ever hoped. With weeks turned to months alone on Naboo, Padme had all the time in the world. She would slowly enforce some of Anakin's darker habits, suggesting that what he did to the Tuscans was justified, even justifying some of his rebellious habits against the Jedi. And with Anakin so far away from the Jedi, with little to no contact with them, he had completely surrendered to the powers of the Sith. While Padme had no real want to show Anakin the Force during their time on Naboo, everything was working so well. Between the trust they shared, the bond they built, and the false love they created, she couldn't help but want to try. Besides, the two of them were now in so deep, it wasn't like he could just back out now. He obviously been wanting this feeling his entire life, and what were the chances of her being, oh, well, a Force user at the very least, deter him from wanting her? Padme and Anakin had been all across Naboo's beautiful countryside, so this time she took him to the middle of the beautiful lake that their estate was located on. A small boat would drift out to the middle of the lake, and she would subtly hint at it, until Anakin asked if she was, to which she would show him. For Anakin, he was a bit taken aback, but being that they'd already been with each other for a little over a month and a half, he felt like he should have noticed. In the ultimate simp move, he apologized for not noticing it, admitting that he should have noticed. Padme expertly used this to her advantage, to which she would make Anakin feel guilty, but at the same time lure him in, telling him that she knew information that the Jedi hadn't yet taught him. Anakin was very interested, but then Padme told him that he needed to withhold telling any of the Jedi about this, because it could ruin everything. Padme placed their relationship before everything, and Anakin bought onto it, not wanting to lose the love of his life. On the boat, she would show Anakin little secrets about the dark side, not enough to make Anakin jump to the conclusion that she was a Sith Lord, but enough for him to want more. Anakin would continue to want more knowledge, and this would be the very evident as their emotional and physical relationship would continue to deepen. Anakin found that she and him were very not so different at all. Being that they were both so similar, it only made sense to certify their bond with each other. Padme would be the one to propose a secret marriage to Anakin. He was a bit taken aback that she suggested it, but in all things considered, he would agree to do so. It would only be a very quick process of which they would marry secretly on Naboo. Out in the galaxy, war would build, but it still wouldn't happen. Because of the assassin not being located, Padme would stick on Naboo for the time being with Anakin. During this time, she would show him things that she had learned from her master, passing it off as things she taught herself. It was much easier to explain as such. The main conflict Padme had was making sure that Anakin was able to convert fully to the dark side. Being she knew the original outcome of the Clone Wars, she would have to just be patient until Sidious did the job for her. Sooner or later, the war would start with the Separatist invasion of Alderaan. When the Republic needed troops, the clones and the Jedi were beckoned and war began. The war would be tense and it would drag on for 3 years, as per planned. All along, Anakin was being cornered by two Sith Lords, Padme and Palpatine, both of them inviting him to their little game, the game that they had decidedly won. But who would win between the two of them? Nearing the end of the Clone Wars, Anakin would be put into a position of confusion, having to choose the Jedi or his pregnant wife, and with Obi-Wan off of Coruscant and Ahsoka nowhere to be found, the choice wasn't too hard. Once Kenobi returned, and he and Yoda challenged both the avatars of the dark side, the fate of the Jedi had been sealed. Yoda would challenge the Sith Lord, Darth Sidious, and would be defeated, and before Obi-Wan could even challenge Skywalker, Padme would assassinate him. Anakin, after having marched onto the Jedi Temple, would tell his wife that they could take over the galaxy and rule as husband and wife. Padme would have no issue with this, sure the cost of Obi-Wan, but as far as Anakin was concerned, he was worried about his wife and her pregnancy, at most. The tragedy of this all, as Anakin would not soon discover, is that while Padme and him had spent the last 3 years together, Padme didn't love him. She really didn't care about him. He was simply a means to an end. Just like Dooku, just like Maul, and just like her master Palpatine. The children were going to be raised as her personal slaves by both her and him. Padme wouldn't suggest going after Palpatine until after she gave birth, which wouldn't be long after they returned to Coruscant from Mustafar. Yoda, having returned to Polis Massa, would retreat into exile for failing the Jedi. Once Luke and Leia were born, they were taken care of by C-3PO and R2-D2, while Padme used the dark side of the Force to physically prepare herself to take down her master. Of course, this was the original plan for her all along, and now she had the perfect scapegoat. Anakin and Padme would walk into the Emperor's office, and at first it would be peaceful, nothing to be concerned about, until Palpatine noticed something was off, and using his last lightsaber, he ignited it before either Padme or Anakin could. Both of them amazed by the pure speed he had, still at his old age. Padme had seen this level before, but Anakin had not. Unluckily for Palpatine, he was at a disadvantage, having already fought Yoda a few hours before. Sidious moved around with ferocity. Skywalker parried where he could, only now seeing for the first time how truly magnificent his wife was with a lightsaber. Padme had both of her blades out, and she moved with so much precision, one would think she was Dooku. The three of them spun around the room, slashing through furniture and cutting at each other. The sounds of the duel alerted the Coruscant guard. They couldn't get into the room because the room was locked by Padme. Anakin made a heavy push against Palpatine, using his physical strength to advantage. Padme reflected Anakin's strength and her speed. Palpatine was remarkable, but even this was too much for him as he faltered, losing control before being swept off his feet and stabbed through the chest by Skywalker. Padme unlocked the door for the Coruscant guard using the Force, and before they could enter the room, she looked at her husband. He smiled at her, telling her that they were before Anakin could say the word free, he looked at a lightsaber sitting in his chest. Anakin fell to his knees and looked at his wife before she could take her second lightsaber and cut him across the chest, killing him instantaneously. When the guard rushed in, Padme told them that Palpatine was attacked by a Jedi Knight named Anakin Skywalker. In Palpatine's final breaths, he told her that she was going to become Empress. With the clones having no evidence to prove the contrary, they would address her as Empress of the Galactic Empire. It was brilliant. She allowed the most evil man in the galaxy, corrupt it, take it over, just so she could stand victorious at the end of the day. Padme would become the Sith Lord of the Galaxy, sending out squads of troopers to execute Jedi and a search party to hunt down Maul to kill him, all of which would be accomplished over the corresponding years. Padme would squeeze the galaxy so tight, though not as tightly as Palpatine would, realizing that if she did, she would turn the people against her, something she didn't want to do and something she learned not to do as Queen of Naboo. She wouldn't discontinue the clone trooper program, rather she would decrease the amount of troops being produced. As for Luke and Leia, they would be raised and trained by her exclusively. When they became of age, they would eventually take over her role as Empress. They wouldn't kill her, it would just be succession of the passing monarch of one to another. Luke and Leia would date outwardly, only using other Force users to bring into their twisted family, to establish a legacy of the Sith, under the name of Amidala for the rest of time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Payne, Icy Raptor, Apollo, Mad Madness Studios, Anakin003, and Gort for supporting the channel. 2,000 likes this video. Got tons of videos coming out this week and the rest of the time. If you want to see what else, remember all that crowns, 1 2 crossovers, check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon, support me in other ways. And for the lightsaber giveaway, go down below. There's a doc. Click on the doc, write your name on the doc. That's all you gotta do. And you have to subscribe to me, of course. Giving away 3 lightsabers at 50,000 subscribers. Don't pay attention to the scammer in the comment section. That's not me. I will announce all winners inside of videos. Let's talk about our video today. Okay, so certainly interesting, certainly different. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it myself, and that's not a critique of it, I don't believe. I just don't know how I feel about it. There's a lot of ground that was covered. This one very much so covered the span of like 20 or so years in a very short period of time. 20 or so years in about 25 minutes, give or take. So that being said, it's certainly I believe this story is meant to be a reflection of Palpatine. That's kind of what I wanted to do, is Palpatine's brilliance being kind of or taken over, like the brilliance that Palpatine uses being almost flipped on his head and flipped against him and used against him, which I think would be what's kind of fun about this, having Padme become the main villain and kind of not being that villain throughout the entire film or video. And that's kind of what I wanted Padme to do. That's the hardest thing. You're not going to believe how many times I had to cut out because I said Palpatine instead of Padme or Padme instead of Palpatine. It's the PAs. Anyways, the idea that this video has is that it's taking the plan that Palpatine had and just riding off of it, honestly. I mean, if you have someone like Padme who is very intelligent, she's very politically intelligent, and taking that knowledge and putting that into a Sith Lord, I mean, you get Palpatine too. And Palpatine, I believe, would have some kind of way to want to try and kill her, and I'm sure that there would be different attempts on her life. Like, for example, Dooku trying to kill her more than once in the Clone Wars would be something that was actually something Palpatine wanted him to do instead of the rivalry between two Sith. But overall, Padme, I believe, using her intelligence, would just use Anakin, and that's something that I wanted to focus on. Now, I know Padme's been the villain of two videos in a row, which is kind of crazy. That I didn't have that on my bingo card for this year. If you did, congratulations, you won a cookie. But I didn't have Padme as back-to-back villains in videos. I mean, she wasn't really a villain in the last video, but I kind of took the happy ending that Anakin got in the last video and flipped it on his head, because he's like, wow, I did it. I got my wife, and I don't have to be a slave anymore. And that's kind of the tragedy of it all. I think the tragedy of this entire video is building up to Anakin finally having his freedom, and then you realize that he's not destined for it, and that, you know, I say this a lot. I don't hate Anakin. He's a great character. I love Anakin. I mean, he's a badass, but he's not invincible. Okay, I'm not Star Wars Theory. I'm not gonna save my favorite characters. I'm just not. That's not what I do here. I always want to not subvert expectations, but give you a story, something that you didn't expect. And I don't think Padme would have done that. I don't think she would have stuck for it. I don't think she would have stayed in love with someone, because the entire idea of Anakin built up for her has been that she has to, quote-unquote, fall in love with him so that the Sith can win. So with that in mind, you get your whole, it's kind of the idea of arranged marriages. You know, are you really going to fall in love with someone that you're arranged marriages with? And that's kind of what I set up there. You know, it's subtly hidden. It's not blatantly said. I try to put it in an interesting way so that you can be like, oh, that's what he's trying to say. Like, yeah, that is what I'm trying to say, is that it's supposed to be more interesting than just, oh, she's in an arranged marriage. So it's set up to be an arranged marriage in a hidden way, in a secretive way, so that you're kind of like, oh, after the video when I say it, or you kind of figure it out yourself. But I wanted that arranged marriage feeling to invoke Padme for not wanting to be with someone that she was kind of forced to be with, and kind of just seeing him as a means to an end, much similarly to Maul, Dooku, and all so on and so forth. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Some interesting twists at the end, and I hope you enjoyed that I twisted up for you guys, unless you expected that to happen, to which I'll try better next time. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.